Romans 6, 1 through 11. What then are we to say? Should we continue in sin in order that grace may abound? By no means. How can we who died to sin go on living in it? Do you not know that all of us who have been baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Therefore we have been buried with him by baptism into death, so that just as Jesus was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in the newness of life. For if we have been united with him in a death like his, we will certainly be united with him in a resurrection like his. We know that our old self was crucified with him, so that the body of sin might be destroyed, and we might no longer be enslaved to sin. For whoever has died is freed from sin. But if we have died with Christ, we believe that we also live with him. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. The death he died to sin, once for all. But the life he lives to God. So you must also consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. I had a problem as I was reading this passage. And it's one that it's a struggle. And it kind of pointed out this weird division that we had in seminary. And I've talked about this before, but one of the struggles of a passage like this, especially for people like me, looking around the congregation, most of the people in the congregation, is a lot of us are infant baptized Christians. We were raised in the church. We have always been Christians. So we have to figure out what that old self is. And context is a little bit important here, and I'll talk about that in a second, but infant baptized Christians have always been Christian. So sometimes it's difficult to see what the old self is. And so I kind of wrestled with this and kind of spun around with it, and I kind of was like, okay, where are we going to go with this? But that kept popping into my mind, and that was always kind of a discussion we had in seminary, is there were Christians who converted to Christianity and chose Christianity, and then there were Christians that were raised in Christianity, and there always used to be a division of this person's old self. They could point to it and said, that died. Christians always struggled with that. And so I wrestled with this all week, and then yesterday we were cleaning, and we were figuring out what gets kept, what gets donated, what gets sold. And I'm looking at my library, and I'm thinking, this whole thing has got to move. Not all of these books need to go with me. Some of these books can go away. And so I'm picking through. And some books it was easy. It's just like, why did I buy this? I read this once, I'll never read it again. Why did I ever keep this? But then I got some of my old psychology textbooks from my undergrad. And I thought about them for a long time, and I stared at them. And I was like, do I keep these? There's a reason I've kept them. There's a reason that they made it from college to home, to seminary, to my apartment in Dubuque, to the house in Cascade. There's a reason I've kept them. But I realized they're not who I am now. A lot of them were me trying to have a foot into that old path that I had before I decided to go to seminary. It was an old version of myself. I mean, I had a counseling textbook, which was not helpful for a pastor. I had a psychopath textbook, which I don't even know why I kept. I had the DSM-4, so not only am I never going to use it, it's also out of date. I had these books that were me trying to keep a foot into that old self, a foot to that self that didn't know the direction it was supposed to go. And when I finally was like, who am I? I am a pastor. The line became obvious. And they got chucked into the box that's going to Goodwill. When I sat down and said, this is the new self, this is the self that God has called me to be, the line became obvious. And my library shrunk just a little bit more. Praise the heavens. So the question I ask in the middle of this is, what is your old self? What is your old self? Look around the congregation and conversation to know most of you are infant baptized. There's a couple of exceptions. Most of you are infant baptized Christians. And so what is that old self? When you look at your faith, what is the old self? And what I realized as I was wrestling with this passage and as I was tossing stuff out is that we know what our old self is. We know what our not Christian self is. We know what it is. If I were to form a line here and we go into my office and you were comfortable enough to be completely vulnerable with me, and I asked you, what is your sinful self? Every one of you could tell me. You may not want to admit that to yourself. You may not think about it ever, but when you sit down and you have to feel that discomfort, you know what your old self, your sinful self, your self apart from God's call in your life is. You know what it is. Now, part of the context here and part of the struggle is that this letter is written to new Christians. This is first generation Roman Christians. And the Roman Christians come from a society that is very different than the Christian society that was being built. A lot of sins that would make all of us so very uncomfortable. A life that was visibly not Christian. And they wanted to hold on to that because it feels good. It feels really good. I mean, at least in the moment, it feels amazing. They wanted to hold on to it. They wanted to stay in that life. The Jesus part was awesome, but the giving up the old life, not so much. And this was first generation Christians. This wasn't third generation Christians or 77th generation Christians. There was no infant baptized Christians in the Roman church. Were no? Was no? Were no. That isn't what happened. It would have been completely a foreign concept for them. So to them, their old self was obvious. But I argue, if we're honest with ourselves, those of us who were raised in the church know what our old self is. And we can point to our life and be like, no, that's when it switched. Or that's when it should have switched. And I don't want to just say, like a lot of people think, oh, when I was a kid and then when I grew up. Because faith of a child was a thing. My faith was way stronger when I was 8 years old than it is now. But there's a point in your life where you're just like, no, God is calling me to something else, and you either answer it or you ignore it. And if you answer it, your old self is dead, but maybe you hold on to it a little bit. And if you don't answer it, then your old self is alive and kicking, and you have not accepted Christ. Because again, this is the natural response to having Christ in your life, is to give up that old self. To give up your old self. Let it die on the cross and let the new self live. That is the natural response, but it's the difficult response. It's not super easy. So what is your old self? As I was thinking about this last night, I could not help but think of this video on YouTube, and it's so good. It's a preacher, and the preacher steps into his pulpit, and you can tell he's ready to just give his speech, his sermon, and he's been tired, he's burnt out, and so he's just like, the reading this morning, and then he finally just gets up and just goes, and then he gets up, and he's like, I am going to deviate from my prepared remarks. And he starts scolding the congregation. And my favorite part of the video, he's like, I took a vow to not say who's the worst, but Dave is the worst. I could stand up here and be that honest preacher. I can point out your sins. I can point out who's the worst in my mind today. I can point out any of these things. But I really don't need to. Because you know your old self. And you know that other people know your old self. You don't get to hide, you don't have this big hidden old self. Other people who know you and love you know your old self too. And know if you're letting it die on the cross of Christ and working to be better, or if you're holding on to it tightly. Now, I'm not saying that a change in career is not necessarily the old life that Paul is talking about. Had I kept those psychology textbooks, I don't think God was going to be in heaven and be like, shame. But I was holding on to an old self. And I encourage you to let go of that old self. You know what your sinful self is. You know what your idle self is, not doing what God is calling you to do. You know what Christ died on the cross to forgive you of. You know what Christ calls you to in his resurrection. So live in that new life. Because as an infant baptized Christian, you were given a special gift. You didn't have to find Christ. Christ was shown to you. And if you weren't an infant baptized Christian, bless you for finding us. We all have to get rid of our old selves. Get rid of our sinful selves. Get rid of our idle selves. And fully be that person that God is calling us to be. When we do that, that is when we become truly Christian, truly followers of Christ. Dead to sin and alive